And here we are. Welcome, everyone. It's the Dev Talk Show here on February 3rd, the day after Groundhog Day. So it was different from yesterday. So for those of you who made it through Groundhog Day and didn't keep looping, thank you for joining us here, 8:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern, live with my co-host, Andy Schwam. And we've also got a special guest, Jess Chadwick, sitting there. How are you all doing?
Yeah.
Let's start with Andy. How you doing, Andy?
Oh, man, let me tell you, I am psyched. I am psyched because our friend Jess is with us today. And Rich is with us as well, but he's hiding behind the scenes, like, just to be clear.
Rich is the voice from the wise voice from beyond right now, right, Rich?
I am the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. There you go.
Yes. And Jess is here. You and Andy, you don't have the Tech Bash shirts on, but
no.
Awesome conference in the Poconos that I've had the pleasure of going to twice, Tech Bash. But
we like it.
Yeah. And ready for 2021, right? It's gonna happen.
Well, ready is a strong word.
I know. I understand.
Hoping. Ready's a lot. Camera change. So yeah, we're hopefully going to have 2021. I mean, who knows what the year brings? We are starting to put the things in motion for that, and we'll hope we'll have a great conference. But I got to admit, I'm still like unsure about the whole thing. I mean, if I'm being honest, if things don't get cleared up, I'm not going to a conference.
Yeah, seriously.
But our plan is to be ready so that as we get closer, and we're going to know, at a certain reasonable date if the world looks like it's ready. But we do want to be like ready to go so we can say, hey, we're doing it. But that's the tricky part. It's hard planning those kind of things. It's hard.
Yeah, and it's great to see you on, Jess. We'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but some great memories from the Static Void podcast.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to be doing this with you again.
Yep.
This is definitely bringing back memories. Your room is a lot cleaner than it was when we were doing the podcast. Same room, cleaner.
So to introduce Jess is these are some of his own words. Jess Chadwick is a software developer and technologist with many years of development experience. It says 15 here. This is probably a few years old.
That was a long time ago.
Experience ranging from embedded devices and startups to enterprise scale solutions in Fortune 25s, magazine and book author.
Cool. Fortune 25.
Yeah.
That was back when I couldn't say that I worked for Bank of America. But now that I don't work for Bank of America, I can say it all I want.
One of the best things you ever did was start a talk by telling everybody, hi, I'm Jess Chadwick. I work for a bank in America. And magazine book author, literally wrote the book on ASP.NET MVC, the reference that many people use. Maybe some of you out there know. Actively involved in the Philly development community, and a few years ago, along with Todd Snyder, started the Static Void podcast, which will definitely who retweeted the show tonight, by the way. So those of you that
came back from the grave to retweet, huh?
The Static Void podcast has been an active retweeter of the Dev Talk Show. I don't, they're just on top of it. Had about, it has about 400 followers, so
it does. Yeah,
it's not going to nobody. But thank you for being here. Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure that's right.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I
was a guest. I was a guest on the show a couple of times and had so much fun with you guys. I always have fun talking to you guys,
Real World DevOps with Andy Schwam, August 14th, 2017. That's at staticvoidpodcast.com. We'll show that again a little bit later.
We have trivia though. Andy was on the Lost show.
That's right.
Andy was on 2 times.
There was another show, yeah.
But one of them got lost. I don't know what happened. We never published it. We never edited it and published it. It just kind of fell by the wayside.
See, you guys say it was lost, but what I hear is that show with Andy was so bad that we told Andy that it was lost as a polite way of being like, oh, we can't go live with that. Like, that was a disaster.
No, I have no problem telling you my criticisms of you. Yeah, as you well know. Maybe, maybe not on the air, maybe not in front of everybody, but, certainly I don't keep those opinions to myself.
Oh, yeah. All right. So
yeah.
What do we got going on tonight, Chris?
Well, what we got going on? So thanks for being here, and those of you who are here live, we're really hoping that this is a good interactive show. If you're on here with us with Twitch or YouTube, we'll definitely be looking for some comments here because I think we're going to have some stories. This show came about because Jess and I worked together quite a few years back, and we worked for a small company that did lots of projects, and it was fast paced, and they were all very different. Lots of different parts of the stack. Sometimes it was web. Sometimes it was, most of the time for desktop type applications, they used WPF. It happened to work okay with touch. Touch was a big thing for them on these huge touch screens.
We had a couple of WPF geniuses too, just
Yes.
magicians with WPF. It was amazing.
Yeah, that was absolutely true. And so one day, this whole show comes from we used to try to figure out, how to we were working on a lot of fast-paced projects. And so Jess made it clear that the best way, one of the ways that he liked to keep us moving was more automation. I remember specifically that he built a template that we used for every service that automatically started firing telemetry, and it already knew using, I think because it was on all the systems, it used MSMQ, and it already knew how to call back home and be a very poor developer's health and availability module, but it worked. And I remember just saying to him one day, like, you just seem to keep going home every weekend and coming back with more of this automation. And he said to me, and I said, it's funny that more of us don't do that. And I'll never forget this. What you said was, it's because developers have a high tolerance for pain. Like, they'll just keep, if they know that doing these 6 steps, or maybe reading this Word document or whatever, and they just got to do it again. Oh, it takes an hour to set up the environment. Well, whatever, I know how to do it. But you would always say, like, it has to stop. And I think I asked you, well, why doesn't it stop? And it's because, well, developers have a high tolerance for pain. So I said, I'm curious why. Like, why don't we make it better? And see what your thoughts were. This will probably evolve. I think a lot of us know that we could be better, faster, measuring things, and yet we still don't do it. And my question to everyone is why?
Yeah, right. And that goes for me too, right? Like, being very, very, very aware of this stuff, even with me right now on my current project. I'm slacking on the unit test, I'm slacking on the automation, but that doesn't mean you don't really try and think about it and at least try to do it where and when you can, as little or as much as you can, even if that is just a little bit. But I think, going back to my bio, right? Like, this all, I wasn't in true consulting with, hundreds of clients. I haven't had that kind of broad a vision into a bunch of different teams, but I have been on probably a couple of dozen different teams, or been involved with a couple of dozen different teams. And so that's kind of where this draws from, is I see a lot of commonality between them. And that's kind of the baseline here. And that is one of the biggest things. That's one of the biggest things that I've seen as kind of a common take on developers, is that development is kind of fundamentally hard, right? Like, we know that going in, the baseline, it's hard. There's a lot to learn. Whether or not you find those things to learn, find those things difficult to learn, at the very least, there's a lot of them. And that in itself is hard, right? Just the sheer kind of mass and the volume of stuff that you need to learn. And so, like, right off the bat, if you don't have a high tolerance for pain, you're just not even going to learn it. You're not even going to get into the field, right? And that sets the stage.
Well, that's depressing. I mean, I want to start off by right off the bat. So maybe we had a misunderstanding here. But Jess, just a minute ago, you said you don't have the answer. So I kind of thought we were coming in here that you were going to solve all of the problems that I have, and you're just admitting that you don't have the answer. So is it like
Rich,
the night folks?
Let's roll the music.
Thanks for coming. Right. Thanks for coming. Yeah, this stuff's really hard. When you think about this high tolerance for pain stuff, I was thinking about how many cycles will I go through before I'm willing to fix something, right? Like, and what I mean is debug something, run it in the browser, navigate 3 pages in, try a field, I get an error message, I stop, I change it, I run it, and I go 3 pages in, and I enter all this data, like, you know what I mean? Like that same, like monotonous, da 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 da. We just keep doing it. And I could spend a day doing that before I'm willing to admit that I should have automated it. Right.
And how long is each one of those cycles, right? A minimum of a minute or two. And how long would it take you to automate? And I think that's what really keeps us from doing it, right? It's going to take me when we're talking about automation in particular, right? Automation, like developer automation, you test automation, UI automation, whatever. It's not free. There is a certain baseline, right, of just setting up the automation framework, right? Just getting the stuff installed and configured and everything. And often that's like half a day, right? And so, but then even
right there, that it's too hard to get started.
Yeah. I don't necessarily say, I don't know if I would say that it's hard, but it is an investment, right? It is work that needs to be done. That is, in the moment, it's taking away from that task that you're trying to do. Like you just said, you're trying to finish this ticket, right? You're trying to get this user story out the door. You're trying to get this feature done. It was supposed to be done yesterday. And this always happens at the end, because that's when you think you're done, but then you find those 300 bugs that have been there the entire time, but you're just now finding them. And so you're going through this cycle of this feature that you've quote unquote completed, right? Like you're at the end and you've got to go through the whole thing in order to keep testing that one thing that you're trying to fix, and then the next thing that was right there at that end of that at that workflow, right? And so you're already stressed and trying to deliver this stuff, and it may not even occur to you to, hey, let's stop and take a couple hours to automate this stuff. Like, let's not kid ourselves. This isn't a couple minutes. This is a couple hours. And the thought of that at that late stage is just super frightening, depressing, and it's just off-putting, right? You're just not going to do it. But even then, I think if you would kind of take a step back, and say like, hey, if I put a couple hours in on this right now, then it will help me for the next week that I'm going to be on this thing, right? Even in that worst case scenario, even if you neglected all this stuff up front, and then on your next project, then you start, before you get in there, you say, hey, remember that hell that we went through last time? Maybe we should take that couple hours up front, and that'll actually benefit us later, right? And so, I mean, like you just said, you quoted me, like I don't have all the answers. This is more of a discussion and kind of talking this stuff through, just kind of 3-4 senior guys, just kind of, making observations and looking at this stuff, because I don't claim to be an expert on this. I don't claim to even do it well myself. But really, kind of the point that I keep coming back to is be aware. Just be aware of it, right? Like the idea that Chris started off the whole show with is, developers just have a high tolerance for pain, and that tolerance just makes them not even be aware of that pain in a lot of cases, especially if it's very little pain. And often, very little pains are the easiest ones to address, and you can just get rid of them entirely. And if you stack up and address a bunch of little pains, that adds up to a decent amount, right?
Yeah, it's like that. What is it? Death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of thing. But so I didn't even pick up on this slight part of this twist on this premise here that you were getting at right now, is that not only do developers have a high tolerance for pain, but they don't know they have a high tolerance for pain.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
So there's a couple different types, right? There's some that know they have a tolerance. They're just like, oh God, I should have automated this. And then there's others that just don't even know that they should automate it, right? And that's a different sort of subset or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. The best story that I had, I already started kind of telling it before, right? But like to elaborate on that story that I just started, it was one of my, it's probably like the second job that I've worked in. So my title was, I think my title was senior developer. I was a mid-level at best. And I was doing a BizTalk project. So this was 15 years ago when BizTalk was a couple years old, and just to hit F5 and just get BizTalk up and running on your machine, it took a minute to just load up, right? Load your assemblies, do all that initialization and everything, and then you go and you run through your test. And I was doing some like FTP processing or something like that, right? And so it just took me a minute just to get the environment going. And then it took me, I think, another minute at least. It might have been a couple more minutes to actually run through my test. And then, like I said before, my issues, my bugs were at the end of this, right? So it's not even like I could skip. And so I was already like 2 weeks later than I said I would be on this project. I was getting a bunch of flack from my boss. Like, I was worried about getting fired over this, right? And in retrospect, somebody actually said, like, yeah, if the boss actually had a little more guts, then he would have fired you, you know? Like, this was really, really bad. And then a couple years later, I learned about unit testing and solid principles and things like that. And then I look back at this project in a whole new light. And I said, the problem that I was having could have been tested in a unit test, could have been automated. I could have been fixing that bug in 5-second intervals rather than 5-minute intervals. Right. And that was just being aware. I was in the moment. I was very aware that I was having that pain. Right. There was no acceptance or tolerance of pain in that moment. I just didn't know there's anything better. Right. And so, but even then, if I had stopped and taken a step back and just said, like, how could I improve this? You know, it's taking me 5 minutes. And at that point, I was just accepting the fact that it took 5 minutes to run a BizTalk process, because it did. But if I had talked to somebody, if I had turned to Todd Snyder, who was literally sitting next to me, one of our co-hosts on the Static Void podcast, he was literally sitting right next to me. If I had turned to him and just kind of talked to him about the problem and told him about it, he probably would have been like, dude, do some unit tests. Right. So it's not like we have all the answers ourselves. We just need to be aware of it and start thinking about it, Googling, talking to people, talking to our peers, and just kind of get your head out of your, the world that you're in, the sand that you're in, as it were, and just
maybe that's the
first problem.
So that's the first takeaway right there. Like, if people are looking for a list of like tips, like how to avoid, how to beat this, right? The first one right there is talk about your problems, right? Like, be out there, communicate with your coworkers, listen to the Dev Talk Show, because we're talking about issues like this. Like, find a community of people wherever that might be, whether it's at work or whether it's your friends that might do similar jobs, right? And express the problem, because listen, you might have the answer. This is a fix not just for this problem alone, but for many problems moving forward, right?
Right.
It's
right.
like talk, like
right.
be and like learn
aware
from people, and like just be out there. Yeah, definitely.
So it's funny you talk about a list and tips. I actually, in preparation for the show, I came up with a list of tips and stuff that I could refer to. Ooh. And so far, you just ticked off 2 of them. I'm just not going to say them, and I'm going to go through the show and see how many you actually say for me. So,
well,
Mike, circle back on that one.
Mike Shea's talking about set up at the beginning of the project. I'm a pretty firm believer that automation for a new project starts with the OS, installing and setting it up with all the dev tools needed for the project. VMware or VirtualBox helps here. I put the here in to make it a little clearer. Automate early and have your UI tests part of CI.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Did that get a couple more?
Automate all the automate. Should I say a ding 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 when you hit one?
Yeah.
Automate all the way to deployment, right? With our automated deployment tools, like, there's no reason you shouldn't be automating all the way to deployment, to some environment, right? Even if it's kind of a local Docker environment, because you might not be able to deploy to your lower lane environments. Like when I was working for the bank, it was very difficult to get into those. They were very controlled, but just something so that you're testing not just your unit test, not just your integration test, the acceptance test, or the UI automation test, as he mentioned, but even your deployment as well, right? Because that's also bites us, And so just the earlier that you set that stuff up, and that should be like step 0.
Right.
And this is a good example too of
every time we say one, I'll hit the bell.
This is one of those good examples too of something that I don't practice what I preach all the time. And the reason is because I'm often doing POCs, R&D work that turns into a production app, right? Like, how often does that happen? Especially like that in my current company, that is my role. And so once you have a working application,
that's too late.
It makes no sense to invest in all this automation in a POC that you may or may not throw away, may not ever see the light of day. And then once it flips over to kind of this production app, now you've written so much code and so much infrastructure that, like, what am I going to do? Pause and take 4 days in the middle to kind of set this stuff up. I mean, the ideal answer is yes. It's exactly what you do. But that's the problem, right? Then reality sets in. You've already set expectations with your boss. You want to be the hero, blah, 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 blah. And, you come 2 months later and you're in the same biz talk situation that I was in. And, you're just crying yourself to sleep at night.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, ideally do it as early as possible. And again, I mean, the antidote here is be aware, right? Like just be aware of the fact that you're in a POC and you're starting to switch over into that productization phase away from the POC. And at that stage, that's where you want to tell your boss, like, hold on, I need to reset here, right? Like I need a couple of days to set up all my automation because I didn't do that because this was a POC, right? And if you're not even aware that you're in that transition, you're not going to do that, right?
So I think, I don't know if I'm going to get to ring the bell on this one, but I think that one way to solve for that problem, Jess, to me, is having, whatever you're using for your task management, but have a task for it, right? And then there's no question about it. It's in the quote project plan, right? And like you're going to say, well, I am working on the project because it is a task. Yes. And when your boss says, well, why can't you just start? I have started. I took the proof of concept and I switched it over, and now it's a thing. Do I get to ring the bell on that? Was that
well, you know what? It's not on my list, but it should be. Absolutely. Yes.
Right,
I'll give you a bell ring on that one.
I also want to point out, can I point out, I want to try another sound effect here. Maybe I can get ready. Hang on.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Okay.
That's the beginning of the project?
Because Mike J in Twitter, on Twitch in chat, Mike Shea says, I completely disagree with your point about the proof of concept. So I'm saying we're going to duke it out right now. I said, let's get ready to rumble.
Yes.
Mike's a fan of the show, friend of the show. He's with us a lot. So Jess and Mike can now just like duke it out about the proof of concept. What do you think?
All right, hold on. I'm going to do some typing.
Are you going to do it on chat?
Is that because well, here's the thing, right? Is that because of the idea that the proof of concept is going to end up practically being shipped, and so here you are, there's a mound of technical debt? And this question is more to Mike Shea, who is at the disadvantage of having to type. Funny, we have talked about how we can have it more of a call-in format, which is definitely being worked on. So I don't want to say that but that's what I'm wondering when I saw that comment. But I certainly, and I agree with you, Andy, I definitely wanted to acknowledge it that so just recently a colleague and I were pairing, not necessarily pair programming. This was more like pair looking over the proof of concept that I had actually just finished. So I don't know if that's a thing. And one of the things that I just threw out, I spitballed, like, well, I wonder if to get things going, maybe we could do X. And he actually stopped me and said, you know why I don't even want you to make that happen is because we might ship it.
Yeah.
So he was afraid. He'd immediately was struck with fear that what you look at is a proof that we can do something might turn into, no, let's just do that. Even though we all know that it was only a stepping stone to what we really want.
Right. How many bosses have said, looks great, ship it?
Yeah.
No, and I want to be perfectly clear, just to kind of defend myself here in this rumble. I wasn't justifying that, right? I wasn't advocating for that. I was saying that's my personal, that's what always seems to happen to me, right? And I've seen it happen to a lot of other people. I'm saying this is kind of the reality of what often happens, not actually what should happen. What should happen is at the end of that POC, you say, that was great. Now where do we go from here, right? And then you start, as Andy said, you turn it into a project plan, right? And the number one thing is you identify that technical debt, those gaps, and you fill them, and then start from that solid foundation, right? But
I like to throw away the proof. I always try to enforce that, like proof of concepts get thrown out, and some people, Mike says, do it in a language you
never use.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Another one people say is that's why those like prototyping tools are so helpful, because they're clearly not really, like, you can't use them in a production app. Those like those makes it look like the handwriting is drawn on and stuff like that. Because I've had times where I've even prototyped like the UI in a real language, and they go, well, it's halfway done. All you have to do is put the code in behind it. I'm like, it is not halfway done. It is not. It's a disaster, right? It's
but again, the point is being aware of the fact that you're in that transition at all, right? Like, when does it stop being a POC, and when does it start being a real project, right? Because that's often very hazy as well. You just kind of keep coding, right? All of a sudden you're shipping.
Yeah, and shipping's the part we like, so it's hard. It's hard to be, it's discipline. Well, I think this whole thing is about discipline, right?
Yeah, a discipline, but discipline not just in development discipline, but also discipline in terms of setting expectations for your manager and above, right? And having that buy-in from management to say, hey, I'm going to take 2 days to set up this solid foundation. I'm going to I'm going to take 2 days to set up this deployment automation and this test automation, right? And you're not going to see anything out of me for 2 days or more, right? And they need to be able to buy off on that.
Yeah. What's interesting is I don't know if we've talked much about the Mythical Man Month on this show, but Fred Brooks obviously wrote, like this seminal work on some of this. And in that book, there's a quote, to plan to throw the first system away. Unfortunately, over the years, he's come to recant this advice because a corollary that the community has kind of come up with is that if you plan to throw one away, you'll end up throwing away two.
Yeah.
And he says my biggest mistake in the build one to throw away concept is it implicitly assumes the waterfall model of software construction. So now I think his advice is more of build the system and then, evolve to what you need to ship, which I guess is more in line of what we think of as agile.
Yes.
I guess.
Yes. I have never read that book myself. I've heard it referred so many times that I feel like I've read it.
Yeah.
But that was one of the early kind of lessons that was taught to me. It was ingrained in me, and they said that's how you do it. Like plan on throwing the first one away. And when you do that, you write crap code in the name of going fast, right? And when I started learning the solid principles, that was really the epiphany for me, that you can write code quickly and modularly without throwing it away and without writing crap code, right? You can write code in a way that you're still writing it quickly, but you can write it with extensibility in mind and being able to build it out, or making something modular and componentized so that you can just wrap that thing up and throw it away and just replace it. Right? That you don't have to do surgery on the entire system to throw this thing away. So you write a bunch of crap code, but you encapsulate it, right? Like you tuck it away under the rug.
That's right. Yeah.
And then when you get around to it, then you can clean it up, right?
It's easy to untangle, Jess, right? Like you write some junk in there, or maybe some mocks, and I don't mean like using a mock framework, but you may just stub something out in code in a single responsibility kind of class, right? But it's not tangled up. You can just rip it out and replace it. That's why we use interfaces and contracts and stuff like that, right? Just out with the old and in with the new.
Yeah, and then this also, this might be a little bit of a reach, but just stay with me. This also kind of calls back to my idea of being aware, right? So when you're trying to knock out a feature, you can be very tempted to just sit down and write very procedural code, one thing after the next, blah, 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 right? In other words, not using the solid principles. And now the solid principles are not a silver bullet, but they help you build composable systems, right? And modular systems. And so when you're thinking very linearly of first, do X and then Y and then Z, and that brings you to A, right? You're tempted to write it that way, but that might not be how you want to kind of lay it out in terms of classes and class structure and your system architecture, right? And that's the kind of stuff that you want to start kind of mocking out, well, not mock, but kind of stubbing out as you go, and follow those ideas of separation of concern. So when you're writing a line of code, be aware of, is this related to the line right before it, right? Or the method right before it, or the class that I'm writing it in, and just keep being aware of what you're doing. With every line of code you're writing, is this the right place to be writing this code? And if not, just move it over, no matter how early in the project you are, even if you're in a POC, right? And that'll help you out earlier on.
Good. Now,
that'll help you out later on if you do it earlier on.
Let me just inject here for a second. Oh, inject. That's a kind of interesting play on that thing. But let me just inject in here. If you've heard Jess and he was mentioning the solid principles, and you might be thinking, hey, what are these solid principles? If you're watching us, especially on the future, on our YouTube channel, stay on our YouTube channel at the Dev Talk Show, youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. And you will see we have a series there on the solid principles. We did that. And so check those out. And give us a subscribe over there while you're there, and like those. And that's the kind of stuff we can talk about. But that was my little commercial. I was just plugging that in there.
Because I think you earlier said it wasn't a silver bullet, and I was going to say it isn't a silver bullet, but it is a 4-part series because we combined a couple of the smaller ones, if you will. But so I think earlier Andy was talking about he's got to test something on a page that's 3 pages deep. So instead of automating it, you just hit F5 and you go do it. And now, as I heard you tell that story, I got to thinking so wait a second. Autofill wasn't invented to help the end user. It was invented to help the developer, wasn't it? But the same corollary is I know that I have done the same thing where if an unfamiliar piece of code, kind of complicated, and so I just kind of get it going and set a breakpoint almost randomly to see okay, it's hit here, and now let me kind of walk the call stack back. And as I'm going, it's almost like I'm laying signposts down. I'll be like, oh, this might be a good place to stop. Yeah. Oh, maybe that place too, so I can check out what's going on. And the funny thing about it is I will get afraid to start removing them until finally I say, okay, I'm pretty sure I know what's going on here. And then I'll start to pull those stakes back out. And I don't know if really that is worth it over saying, why can't I put a test harness around this? Is it because I'm unfamiliar with this new project? Or I'm afraid that by the time I write the test harness, what if I get stuck? So I know I won't get stuck doing this, but there's no way to kind of go back and say, did I waste more time?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not talking about a junior thing. This is like last month.
Yeah.
So anybody wondering, is it something you get better with experience? No.
No.
Yeah.
No.
These are pain points that we just run into over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks like us, on the shows and everything, we're always advocating unit tests. Everybody should be unit testing. It's, one of the number one best practices, things like that. And that's all well and good unless you're in that situation that you're talking about, Chris, right? Like you're coming into this new code base, you inherited a code base, or maybe you wrote the code base, whatever. It doesn't have any tests, and it's not testable, certainly not unit testable, right? Like you have a method that's 500 lines long and it's calling 5 different systems and nothing has interfaces and you can't mock it out, right? And so in those cases, you're faced with, what do I do? And you feel like, oh, well, if I can't write unit tests, well, then there's no point, right? It's going to take me 7 weeks just to get this thing refactored to even start writing unit tests, right? And in those situations, those are the times where I say, hey, just go and you do, I call them acceptance tests, UI automation, whatever, right? Start at the front like a user would. Basically, just start by automating the stuff that you're doing, right? If you're doing a browser application, start by automating those clicks and typing that you're doing. And even if it is very specific to you, right? Even if you're going to throw these things away when you're done your specific thing, at the very least, you've now automated that thing that you continue to do over and over and over again for this specific feature, right? Because growing that out into a full-fledged suite that you're actually going to maintain is really, really hard, mostly because of test data, right? Like it ultimately comes down to the test data is just really difficult to manage. So like, don't even try and solve all those problems. Just write to go ahead and hard code to the test data that is in the system right now, right? And hard code to the stuff that you're doing right now manually. Just start by automating that, even if you throw that away. Best case scenario, you don't throw it away. Or best case scenario, it actually turns into a suite. That's rare. But worst case scenario, it helps you save some time on this feature, and you end up throwing it away, right? But you learn, right? And maybe you can copy some code, salvage some code for the next time, right?
Right, and you're learning a skill along the way, like you said. You're learning about how to build those things. So you're talking about, and I think, and Meg in the chat is saying, "What a coincidence! I'm writing out RSpec tests right now." Yeah. So Jess, I get right. You're talking about using some kind of framework that does maybe like a screen recorder thing, right? Where you click on. So instead of entering in first name, last name, address, zip code, next. and then billing address, shipping address next, and then finally getting to the place, that one button that you needed like 6 streams deep.
Yeah.
Why not just record those things? If you get good at those. Now, so here's the thing, right? Talk about, this is a good skill to build up, right? Because if I was to do that today or tomorrow, it would take me a while, right? Because I got to learn the tool and I got to kind of get the hang of it and I got to get used to it. But the next time I go to do it, now, like, okay, so put in a little time, make the commitment, right? Put in a little time. And the next time I go to do that, I'm going to get better at it and better at it, to the point where I got something and I'm only like 1 page deep. I'm like, oh, I'll just record that real quick. I know I'm going to be doing it 6 times, right?
Yep.
So do we want to plug any frameworks like Meg mentioned and Mike Shea says RSpec also. And
Well,
he's
look,
talking about Chef in
you don't even need to get into any of those frameworks. I'm glad that you said UI recording tools, right? Because as developers, certainly I personally had always avoided those, because if you do a UI recorder and you just start recording your clicks and your typing, and then you try and generate tests from that, they're garbage, right? You can use them as a starting point, but then you're going to end up refactoring the heck out of them, but don't throw away those tools, right? Especially in these situations where you have nothing else. I had that in one particular project where it just saved me, right? Where I think it was the Selenium UI recorder, and I hooked it up to Firefox, and I just recorded that test that I was working on with the full intent of throwing it away when I was done in 2 days. Right. And I plugged in that recorder and I hit record and I started doing my test run, and then I ran into my bug and I stopped it. Right. And then I tried to fix the bug. I ran I replayed the test, did the same exact thing. Did it work this time? No, and then at the end of that, you hit the nail on the head, right? Even in that worst case scenario that I said before, in which you're throwing everything away, even in that worst case scenario, you're still taking away that knowledge and that experience of actually using that tool and learning the tool, right? And so the next time, baseline, you're doing it faster, but maybe even you're able to take that output and maybe start generating some of those tests that you might actually save, right? Right. Especially for common behavior like logging in or something like that, right?
You gave a talk once, Jess, and this was in the days before we were really good at recording everything. I can't remember where this talk was. I think it was called Automated Testing That Isn't a Complete Waste of Time.
Yeah.
And the thing that you were trying to get across in that talk, and I would love to, it was my memory's a little phasey, a little fuzzy. English is so easy. And words and talking live, is that I think a lot of us, and this includes probably a lot of people watching, have tried to set out to automate something using a tool, using Selenium, writing some unit tests, and for whatever reason got burned, or maybe just didn't feel like it worked out. And so now you've got that bad taste in your mouth, and you've gone into the meeting with them, and they sit across from the table and say, like, I don't know, and unit tests just seem like a lot of work for not a whole lot of value. So I guess where I'm getting at is, what are your tips to make sure that what you try provides value so that we don't leave with a bad taste in our mouth?
Yeah, I hate to sound trite and cliche and just keep repeating myself, but it's all about being aware of what you're doing, right? So when you're in this situation and you take on this new tool and you're recording this test to verify this feature that you're building, rather than thinking of it as a practice of just focusing on just getting this code out the door and fixing this bug or whatever, kind of take a step back and think about the tool that you're using, what it's doing, why it's doing it, and just kind of take a couple minutes to kind of learn the background about that, right? To Andy's point, stuff that you can take forward, always be growing. Don't just throw away everything. Don't throw away the entire experience. Always have something that you can take out of it. To your point earlier about, when I sit down with a team and they say, oh, we tried that, we tried, and this is true for frameworks, tools, whatever, we use Selenium, we use the test recorder, and it didn't work. It generated flaky stuff. And so, it's a crappy tool, and my response is did you use it right? And that's not in a judgmental way. It is a very legitimate question. Did you learn how to use the tool? Maybe you were trying to make the tool do something that it wasn't meant to do, or it does do what you were trying to make it do, but that wasn't a good fit for the scenario that you were, trying to use it for.
Totally right.
Right. And so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, for lack of a better term, and just try and use the right tool for the right job and understand what these tools are for.
That's such a good tip across the board. That's such a good tip across the board. How many times have you heard people say, well, we tried Agile and it failed? Really? How'd you do it? Well, we didn't really use sprints per se, and we didn't actually use like a board, or story points, right? No, we didn't do estimation, but we were trying to be agile, and it just really didn't work out. And it's
we didn't document anything.
Right, but we didn't document it, right. And the same thing, like you talk about people who say, well, we tried unit testing, but we didn't get anything out of it. Or we tried this and we didn't get anything out of it. And I've heard from people say, well, entity framework, totally, I don't know why we want to use entity framework because it didn't help at all. I'm like, and I look at the stuff and I'm like, you didn't learn about entity framework, you just started throwing stuff in here and you didn't realize all these features that it has or whatever it is, right? And so there's just such a great takeaway there is like, don't just use a tool. You got to invest a little time in a tool to learn like what it's for and what it does, and like kind of try to get it right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
So this is another one of my tips, just from a broader sense, right? Like, so I mean, the tip that I wrote down verbatim is when something new comes out, you understand it at a high level and determine if it looks like a game changer or just another tool in your belt, right? So that's kind of speaking to another concept of choosing where you want to put your time, invest your time in learning, right? Because you don't want to invest your time in learning some specific tool that just duplicates 20 other tools out there, right? Because they're just a dime a dozen. You do want to obviously invest time in learning the tool that you or your team decides to use, obviously, right? The better you understand it, the better you'll be able to use it, the better it'll work for you. But really what this tip is really focused on is there are things like Docker, right? They're just true game changers. And now Docker for like local development, it still hasn't been as game changing and evolutionary as I expected it to be, or at least not yet. There's still some pain points there, but certainly in terms of deployment and production management, of those things, it's just a true game changer. But the point is, when you see a new tool, framework, library, whatever it is, take a little bit to just see what is it, where does it fit in the world, right? Is it some new thing or a brand new, better way to do some old thing, or is it just another tool that does something that 20 other things do, a tool or framework, right? And that's when you make that decision of, do you kind of dive in and learn about this thing even more and see how it might help improve your life, and then you want to become an expert, or maybe somewhere in the middle, it is a brand new tool, it is good, I'm going to try it and I'm just going to use it once and I'm going to move on. Even if you do that, you kind of take your experience of learning and using that tool and you apply it to the next tool that comes out, right? Or the framework. I'm using tool and framework interchangeably here. I'm kind of going from like dev tools, automation tools. We're talking about UI automation and things like that, all the way down to frameworks like React, Knockout, Angular, And so like when React comes out, you look at that and you say, oh, well, I've been doing Knockout for years. How are the two similar and how are they different, right? And when you really look at it, it's, React does things fundamentally different, right? On the surface, it looks the same, but it does things fundamentally different. And that is a game changer. This is the future, right? React, Angular, things like that. But this is the stuff that you build up over time just by continuing to do this over and over again, but you're doing it very mindfully and kind of extrapolating that knowledge to other tools. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm babbling a little bit.
No
well,
way,
I'm just
man.
amazed that we got a knockout reset. That was pretty good in 2021. That was great.
I love Knockout. Jess and I have a lot of stuff in common. Like that's one of I use Knockout.
Chris and I, we were in the trenches with Knockout.
Yeah, no, I remember you brought it in and to kind of help speed things along, and it was kind of newish at the time.
It was brand new to the team.
It was brand new to the team. That's for sure.
It was relatively new, and it was brand new to the team. And I said, guys, we're doing this. And
Yeah,
the team
we're
was
just
like,
gonna do it.
no, we can't
No,
learn
what are
it.
you doing?
We need to deliver this next week. And I was like, guys, the only way we're
Okay.
delivering this next week is with knockout. So we're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, it made things so much easier, and it was so simple. I mean, we've talked about this, I think, other times too. About I just thought it was a great framework because it didn't try to be all things. Maybe it couldn't be at those days, but written by the great Steve Sanderson too. I mean, that guy's awesome. So, Jess, I was thinking when you were talking about, learning and getting the right tool, I think it also sort of plays upon, you don't want to take it. Well, what you were saying is like learn a tool and all those kind of things. And, I was thinking about the golden hammer concept as well that you want to avoid. It's like, just because you found one really good tool doesn't mean it's the best one for the, like, oh, I do this great thing for unit testing. It'll probably make my quick debugging experience better. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe not. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
no, I completely agree. Actively go looking for those other tools and try them out, at least superficially, right? And see how they might be different than what you have, rather than just continuing to use that tool that you've been using for 20 years over and over again.
Hey, do you guys have, and maybe, I don't know the size of the teams you're working with, but, one of the things I struggle with at work is like getting those tools out there, like getting everyone to know about them. Do you guys have any good tips for like, how do you share that knowledge amongst the coworkers? I mean, sure, we talked earlier about like getting in those conversations and going to user groups and coming to the Dev Talk show and listening to those things. But, right at work, like, are there good ways to share? How do you guys do that?
Yeah. And that's interesting because that goes back. No, this is a problem. This is a problem.
Okay.
That's why I said, yeah, is that how much at many, many different organizations and workplaces, how many times are you as a developer left like, aren't you learning? Aren't you keeping up?
Yeah.
So
Right.
if that's a mindset that you're kind of already living under, when is the team supposed to get together to learn? Are they supposed to have a lunch?
Yeah.
Are they supposed to have an afternoon, or forbid a whole week? That's feature delivery time.
Yep.
Right.
So I'm sorry, Andy, that I'm not answering your question. I kind of answered it with another question.
Right.
I agree. It's awkward.
How
right?
do you do that?
Right. It's
Well, I can
fundamentally
answer-
training, right? And like the broader issue of
Sure.
training is something that companies in general, kind of struggle with often. It's that, like Chris just said, it's this, are we going to spend a day training people, AKA not producing any output? That's how, management generally sees it. You're not giving billable hours for whatever definition of billable, or are we just going to like keep working and never learn anything new? Right. And so it's the,
Right.
and or expect the employees, the workers, to take their own time, learn it on their own time, right? And then there's also the kind of the subtlety, which is what we as devs generally do, is learn it on the job. Like you look like you're working, you're knocking out features, you're actively dev in progress on a ticket, but you're really just learning this framework, right? You're trying it out. So you're doing it, no ill intent, but you're kind of doing it surreptitiously, right? And they don't.
Yeah.
You're learning it on the job, as it were. And frankly, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing in that you have no idea how long it's going to take, right? Because you don't know the framework. But it's also, personally, I feel, at least in my experience, again, this isn't a generalization, but in my experience, the best way to learn something is to actually use it in a real project, right? Not just actually use it to build a blog,
What?
Wait, to-do app doesn't count?
Right. Not to use it to build a to-do app or a blog that's never going to go anywhere, but actually use it to tackle the problem at hand. That's where you're really going to learn things. Even if your company does send you to a 3-day training, on React or whatever the framework of the day is, you're going to come back from that aware of a lot of concepts, still not knowing how to do a damn thing, And it's not until you put your hands on the keyboard and actually start trying it on your project right now that you'll actually learn the thing. So,
well, we can go into a whole other topic, and I don't know if Chris wants to, but like this is a whole topic of like, you know, devs learning stuff.
yeah.
Or
Right.
how to invest in your own devs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's like that's another show, right?
Yeah, I mean, have Jess come back and we could do that show. But you know, I do want to point out, you know, Chris, going back to your point about the whole don't have time thing. This is really hard. I'm trying to change the culture in my organization and tell people that they do have time, right? And reminding them that I'm telling you have time. And when you have, you know, I try to use this as an example, but I'm trying to tell them if there's 40 hours in a week, right? And you're doing your sprint planning and stuff like that, you just don't commit to 40 hours worth of stuff. You have to give yourself buffer time. Not just for meetings, but like, and I'm not stealing from the business that is expecting us to get work done, right? But part of your job is to improve all the time. And so I say to them all the time, I'm giving you permission. Like, it's okay to shave off some time to learn new things, or to read an article, or to take a Pluralsight course, or to, you know, whatever it is. Like, it's a hard thing to do, and to change that. And it's actually a compliment to the team at some point, because they're always like, but I'm so busy and I don't want to miss that. I'm like, I know you don't want to miss it. So, you know, but like, so let's plan it better next time. Don't commit to so much stuff. Right. I don't know. It's just a cultural thing, and it's on my mind because I actually had this conversation today. So I just let that go without kind of coming back to it.
Yeah, well, and that's doubly difficult because devs are already incredibly optimistic about their estimates in the first place, right? So they're already committing 3 days to what should be taking 5 days, you know. And then on top of that, we want to try. So it's almost like, hey, why don't you estimate 10 days? And they're like, what? That's ridiculous. No, that's actually kind of reality if you're going to buffer in for this stuff. So you're talking about learning, right? That's like, that's bonus at this point. Like we were just talking before about setting up that foundation of unit tests and all this stuff. Like this is stuff that it's going to help you on this project right now, right? Let alone the future.
Nobody put that into the estimate, right? And that's
right.
Problems. That's where I was going back earlier. I said about discipline. You have to be disciplined enough to say, when someone says, how long is this project going to take? You have to say, well, I could code it. It's going to take me about, how often, right? Oh, it'll take me about a week to code it. So, you know, probably like, you know, I'll deploy it the next day, 6 days or whatever, you know, and you're like, no, what about the unit tests? Oh, okay. Can I unit test it after we go live just to like sort of pull that back in, you know? So be disciplined and you know, DevOps on day one, right? Make a task for it, estimate it. Unit tests, make a task for it. Well, I don't like tasks for unit testing, but sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah, see, you can never save the unit testing for afterwards because that's the time you'll be spending dealing with the QA tickets.
Right, of course.
Right. If you unit test ahead of time, you'll have plenty more time in that QA phase.
Because you won't have any problems to fix. Exactly. Yeah, right.
Again, not practicing what I preach. I'm just making an observation.
Yeah.
Theoretically, ideally here, right?
Right.
Mike Shea says, automate now or wake up at 3 a.m. with a page to fix it later. Page.
So true.
But whatever. We'll
pager goes off. Yeah.
But let's not. I don't want to focus on the pager. The fact of the matter is, right? Who's gonna have to come figure it out? And so it's you, right? You're not only creating technical debt, you're creating like this alarm clock pointed at your head that you're gonna get, you know, hey, we need you right now. It doesn't matter what you were planning to do tonight, this weekend.
Yeah. No, and look, let's bring this back to the core premise of the show, right? It might sound like we went on a tangent. No, absolutely not. This is the pain of development, right? The pain of dealing with these QA tickets and wasting so much time going back to that feature that you wrote 3 weeks ago and trying to figure out what the hell you were doing back then 3 weeks ago, because that was so long ago. That mental model is gone, right? And instead, hey, why don't we think about this? There's nothing we can do at this point, but for next time, let's really kind of understand and trace that back. What if I had put in some more time for those unit tests? Back when I thought, hey, maybe I should write some unit tests. Now I'm going to write the code today. Like if I had gone down a bit different path in my Choose My Own Adventure book, right? Like, would that have saved me time here? And maybe I can make a different choice next time. And that's why, that's one of the things I love about Agile. So much the Agile process is that retrospective at the end, right? So there's actually time built into the process to say, hey, let's take a breath. Let's look around, analyze what happened, right? And you're not just doing it alone. Even better, you're doing it with your team, and you're getting that candid feedback from the team and saying, hey, I think we could have done this, and this better. Next time we can try and do this, right?
Yeah.
So that's where
and
the
I like that you brought it back to. I like that you brought it back to we could do this better, because I think at first you said, what did we do wrong? It doesn't mean we did anything wrong, but what can we do better? Is a positive spin on that whole thing, I think, right? One of the things I like to tell people say, Andy, you like DevOps, right? You're really into DevOps. You really like DevOps. And actually I am now, right? But in the beginning, specifically, I would say, no, I hate DevOps. I honestly, I don't, it's a lie now, because I've gotten to a point where I actually like it, right? But going back in my career a little bit, I used to say, I hate DevOps.
I just hate getting called in on the weekend.
Right. What I like is writing code, right? And it's sort of like unit tests. Do you like unit tests? No, I hate writing unit tests. But what I really like is not fixing bugs, right? Or, like that kind of thing. And so if we spin it that way to developers, we say, why would you want to get good at something like this? You might not think it's a valuable skill. Well, look at where you're spending your time and think, I want that time back to do the part of the job I really want to do, which is just writing code, right? And to tell you the truth, unit testing is writing code. And so I kind of like unit testing because I'm writing code. I'm not fixing bugs or, tracking trace, running down problems and stuff like that. So that's the way I try to sell it to people.
Or even when you are doing traces and debugging and running down problems, you have a solid foundation from which to do that, right? Like, let's not pretend that our unit tests follow every branch of our code and do every possible thing. When we get to that bug that actually went into production, even when we did write unit tests, we start from this foundation of like, let's back up to where we know it worked, attach a debugger to the unit test, and try and reproduce this issue from here, right? And so now you've even made that bug detection and fixing easier, right?
Right. Mike's got a good question here. I don't know if you saw that one, Chris, about automating security checks. We spent a lot of time on one project with firewall versions, file permissioning, et cetera, testing. I think I don't know, does that count as like DevSecOps, or would that sort of be a little different than that? I think it's probably time well spent, though.
When it comes to any type of testing, for me, it's all about ROI, right? Whether it's unit tests or, test in production, right? And anywhere in between, it's all about ROI. So even when we're talking about unit tests and that mythical, like 100% test coverage, like I just said, even if your tool says you have 100% test coverage, there still could be some scenarios that some bugs that go into production that you didn't think about, you didn't test, even though the code got executed. Still could have caught everything, right? I like to liken it to, this is my favorite metaphor that I've ever come up with. You have the highway system. Now, this is better with a visual. You have the highway system of the United States, right? And you've run this 500-pound motorcycle across the entire highway system, 100%, right? But the very first time you take that 18-wheeler over that bridge, it collapses. Right? I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's just this unknown, unexpected, or even just we didn't really anticipate that, right?
Right.
I'm sorry. What was the question I got?
It's about
I'm very excited about that metaphor.
Automating security checks, right?
Automating security checks. Yeah. So even when we're talking about unit tests, you want to focus on, at least I do, you focus on the parts of the system that are most important. Now, whether that's because they're run the most or they are the most visible or whatever it may be, you focus on them, right? And you spend less time, even at the unit test phase, you spend less time on the other kind of the stuff on the periphery, right? And so I don't think there is kind of a universal answer to how do you test the security and things like that. It really depends on your situation. right? And it also depends on how difficult it is to write those tests, maintain those tests, and actually run those tests. Because if it's super, super difficult and expensive, the ROI might just not be there, right? Even though security is arguably one of the most important things, if it takes you a month to write those tests or they break all the time and you're taking 20 hours a month to fix and maintain those tests, maybe manual testing is the best option there, right?
That's true. It might be. And you know what? One of the things I was thinking about, by the way, is if you want to get good at testing your security checks and these file permissions and these type of things, you know what's a good thing to do before that? Is have a requirement for that, right? Because how often is that not even in there? No, I'm being serious, right? Like,
no, I can't help my laugh because it's never a requirement. That's my.
I'm just winging it half the time when we do our security. You know, whatever we're putting in for a certain, you know, file system security or something like that, we're putting it in from experience and things like that. But if we got a requirement for it, now I'm thinking about, well, I have to test for my requirements, right? And so I've got a better chance because I think it's a really good idea to test for those things, but I'm probably not going to do it if it's not a requirement. Like not that I'm required to do, but if it's not documented as a requirement of the project, you know, then I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going through those requirements, and so you know, it kind of comes back to that part of discipline as well, you know.
And those kind of requirements are never going to come from the product team, from the business, right? Unless they saw it on the news somewhere, you know, unless they saw the latest SolarWinds attack and they're like,
but
hey,
even then it's granular. It's too granular. The business comes to you and says, we're not using SolarWinds, right? And I'm not trying to disparage them. It's just that they saw it on the news. That's the extent of the requirement from the business, where you're sitting there as a developer knowing that's not what this is really about. You know?
Yeah.
It's about, are we fearing user input? Are we you know?
Yeah. Another little, this is a tangent, a good story though. At the bank, you know, I gave this presentation about the React framework, very high level, just kind of what it is, and I gave it to a mixture, but there was a decent amount of business folks in there. And at the end, this was like a couple weeks after the Super Bowl. At the end, one of the top business guy kind of leans back in his chair and he says, "Oh, this is so great. Does this get us into the cloud?" He was so proud of himself because IBM had all these Super Bowl commercials about, you know, their cloud or whatever. And I said, "Yep, absolutely."
You would have been more impressed if he said, "But does it scale?"
That would have been
So,
good.
like, well,
you know, that's where you're coming from. And again, I'm not being judgmental or disparaging. I'm just saying, like, that's where they're at, right? That's where their mind is. And it's your job or somebody's job, not on their side, to kind of bring these things out. I mean, I'm currently implementing SSO for our company right now. And I am telling the business the bulk of the requirements, because the bulk of them are just security and everything, right? And they're kind of telling me, here's how we want it to look. You know, because that's frankly their input in this project.
This is the experience we'd like people to have, and you're going, well, here are the things you've got to do to make sure that, you know, bad actor in the classic cryptography, Mallory, doesn't come in and read Alice and Bob's stuff to use those classic cryptographic personas. Look at that. I snuck that in there from a book I think I've got back there, Applied Cryptography somewhere.
Yep. And to their credit, the business folks on this project, even they went out and they Googled some stuff, right? And they're like, oh man, we got to avoid these man in the middle attacks. And I'm like, yeah, do, you know? Yeah. They're trying, right? I'm not being disparaging. They're trying. I love it, but like not helpful, you know, it doesn't get us where we need to be. It's certainly not going to give us these fine-grained, you know, security requirements, let alone things that we can actually test.
So as developers, when we go to work, I don't care what system you're using. I don't care what software you're using to manage. At some point, somebody says, go do something. It's your task. Sometimes we put acceptance criteria. I bet you there are some teams and some people here watching. They're like, we're not too great at acceptance criteria. I can say that about myself. Do we need, in order to avoid having a lot of pain, do we need to accompany every task with, the task isn't done until we have supplied the automated test? And I don't care what this is, unit test, end to end. I don't care if it's, like you said, Jess, a test harness that just, that brute forces its way into the website and tests the thing you want. The task
that you throw away. that you
that
throw
you,
away
well,
next week.
someday maybe you'll do something better,
Right.
But at least for the foreseeable future, I know that that test will prove next week that the task was done, and the week after, and the week after, and then when it breaks, I do have a fundamental question when it breaks. Did it break because I changed some code or some dependency or some other ripple effect that now doesn't meet the requirement, or did the requirement change and my test didn't keep up with it? The point is,
Nah.
test broke.
95% of the time, if it's in a UI test, it broke because of the bad test data. The test data changed.
The test data changed.
Didn't have anything to do with the system breaking, and that's
For everything we do we need a way so that we can stop thinking about it for a while, and that's not manual testing?
That's absolutely what I've been advocating for recently. Is we've gotten a lot in my current place. We've gotten a lot closer to Agile, and we've been kind of writing user stories. And at first, those user stories were just descriptions of a feature without any acceptance tests. And you immediately shoot back and you say, well, how do I know this is done? And really, it's not meant to be confrontational. It's meant to be, we need to get on the same page. Right? So like what you're thinking, even in this description that is very clearly laid out here, and we all agree on that description, but how do I know when I've actually solved that problem and delivered, right? What specific things? Because I could think that it's X and Y, and you could think that it's X, Y, A, B, C, right? And unless we actually specify that, then we're not getting anywhere. That's just from a requirement standpoint, right? And then on top of that, prove it, right? Not prove it with works on my machine, but prove it with an automated test that works on somebody else can run on somebody else's machine or this target environment or something, right? And then best case scenario, you're building out that test suite as you go and you deliver those stories. What I like most about that is it also kind of changes the mindset that unit or tests, whether they're unit tests, integration tests, whatever, set that aside, tests are part of the deliverable. Right. So in a couple of teams, when I started introducing unit testing and I told them to start writing tests, I started seeing tickets that specifically said, like, build this, test it, 2 different tickets. Right. And I'm like, no. They're not 2 different exercises, because the moment you do that, you separate them in your mind, you're going to do exactly what Andy said before. You're going to, oh, well, this task is actually going to happen. The testing task is going to wait until after QA. Right. Like, no, building it is testing it. Testing it is part of building and saying you're done, right? And then you take that a step further. When you have those clear acceptance criteria, those tests are specifically focused on that acceptance criteria, right? And generally those are, I call them acceptance tests, but they're usually UI automation tests that QA or somebody can actually run, and they're not unit tests, right? It has nothing to do with the underlying code underneath. It's more the behavior of the system as a user would use it, because that's what user stories describe, right? And we're talking in Agile terms. This doesn't have to be Agile.
No, it doesn't have to be Agile.
You can do this in Waterfall, right? Just prove the feature works. It's generally what we're saying. And in order to do that, you need to be on the same page of exactly how should it work and what does it mean for it to work. Just write that stuff down.
How much investment do we need to do in our people who, the reason they maybe don't test is because, like, writing the code, getting out of your brain the steps to do something in whatever language or environment you're working in is one skill. But now the skill of, okay, now I'm going to go build something, write more code to test, and I'm not as good at that, so I'll leave it till the last second. And now we're at the end of the sprint, and so the team just agrees to ship because it is working. We manually tested it. So do we have to invest in ourselves, in our teammates, be better mentors about this, or give the time? Or, I mean, if we fail at it at first, we can't give up. And it's pretty easy to give up, to just say, well, I guess we're not very good at delivering the tests along with the features. And then innovative things happen, like separating the tickets, which you're saying was a mistake, Jess. You're saying, no, you shouldn't have done that.
Right. So what is your question more on?
Well, let's think about how that came about.
How
did those 2 tickets come about? Did it come about because somebody said, we're not doing very well at delivering both at once, so I got an idea. What if we deliver the feature and then deliver the tests, and that way we'll get it done? Like, how did that? And so is it because we're not very good at this?
Right. The fact that those concepts are even 2 different concepts in the first place, that they could be represented as 2 different tickets. Yeah, I mean, in that particular case, that was just me doing a poor job to, delivering that concept to the team, because that's how I should have said it in the first place, right? Like, this is how we write code by writing tests for it. And that doesn't necessarily mean test first, right? I'm a true believer of test-driven development, but not necessarily test first development. By test-driven, I'm really thinking, again, I hate to be repetitive and trite, but just being aware of what you're doing. And in this particular scenario, it means about when I'm writing a code or a class or a method, I'm thinking about whether or not I wrote a test already, or I'm going to write a test in an hour or a day. I'm thinking about how am I going to test this thing, right? And just by thinking that, I start kind of applying the solid principles and making things more composable, because in order to do that, you need to have ways of getting into that code, and that kind of inherently makes it a little more composable, right? And so just being aware of the concept of testing, and whether or not you've created the test already, you will at some point be writing a test, and this code needs to be executed by that test. So how are you going to do it? And how are you going to represent the test data and all of that stuff, right? So you don't need to necessarily answer all of those questions at once at the beginning, but you need to be aware that those issues exist, right? And kind of start thinking about them.
I think there's a couple of things. Chris was talking about that whole like two work item problem, the code and the tests, and we've all seen that, right? I've probably done it myself when I was learning to do unit testing. I think it's inevitable that that's one of the first steps. You're like, well, so-and-so told me I have to do some unit testing and I didn't do it. So I'm putting that reminder, I'm putting in a task for myself, call it a reminder even, right? Now, it also leads to another problem that comes from doing that, is that even if you do it sort of close and you don't move on to the next task, but I've seen some people say, well, we're gonna put the code out into QA so the QA can test it, and I'll write my unit tests while they're testing it and things like that. But already now I'm going, changing the tests, you often have to fix the code because you didn't make it as testable as you might have thought, or you found a bug. Yeah. And, there's so many like things that go into that. And so having those two tasks, it's problematic in a lot of ways. But I think a lot of this is...
Well, and how do you know you're ready to throw it over to QA? How do you,
right, exactly.
How do you know when you're done?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I feel like, so in my company, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say a lot of this is my fault, right? My fault. I don't think I didn't cause the problem, but I own it now because of my seniority level of where I am in the company, right? And so it's my job to fix it, right? And to me, it's cultural, right? All of this is culture. This is all about telling developers they do have time to do these things.
Yes.
And they can learn to do unit tests, and they can add time to the project because they think it's going to take longer. And at first it does take longer. Let's be clear about that. I think at the end of the day, projects go faster with unit testing, but there's a learning curve like anything else, right? But this to me is cultural. And until we as managers or whatever we are, I don't know, Jess, what your title is. I mean, I think you're in like a seniority level role, right?
I'm not sure what my title is these days either.
These days, I don't know what you are,
so,
but you
some
have
kind
been.
of architect, team lead thing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You've been in that role, right?
Yeah.
We have to fix that problem before it's us, right? I don't know if that makes sense to you guys.
I've seen the problem, and the problem is us.
Yeah,
we got back to that. That's cool.
Taking that even further, right? Like, not only as a team lead, speaking as a team lead, and by team lead, I'm really defining team lead as not just leading the people on the team, but leading the team's output and owning that code base, right? I think that it is your responsibility to go in and establish that solid foundation from a framework configuration and testing standpoint, right? Like you're configuring that end unit or whatever you're using, right? You're adding that package, you are configuring it, you're making sure it works, you're tying it into whatever build or making a build, right? Like that's you. as the team lead. You own that stuff, because the rest of your team generally, now obviously it works differently on different teams, but the rest of the teams, like, you don't want 5 different people trying to do all that. That is inherently a one person job. It's a single track job to get all that stuff set up. And naturally that should be the team lead if there's a person with that title on the team, right? And so you're doing all that work of getting it in there at the same time, evangelizing it to the team as well, teaching them, giving them some solid examples as you do that, right? You're literally, in order to make sure that your configuration works, test that the test framework works, you're writing the first couple of tests, right? And you got to do that in a very exemplary way that you can show them, hey, here's how we do this, right? And then kind of build out from there. And then the way that I've done it is I kind of invite a couple of people, I kind of roll it out slowly, right? Involve a couple more people and just kind of really manage it hands-on in the beginning to make sure that every test that we write is exemplary. That if anybody goes into any test and tries to copy and paste it, they're starting with a good foundation, right? And then once you've got a kind of a solid base of that, then you say, okay, open the floodgates, everybody can go in. And then, it's going to go downhill a little bit because people have got a job to do, right? And they're going to possibly get a little sloppy. This is kind of the reality of it. And that's fine. It's also you as a team lead to kind of keep on that and just, take those as learning opportunities. I once saw a test suite that literally mocked out an interface and then tested the heck out of it. And that was just, I opened that up and I'm just like, wow, this was just a solid misunderstanding of all of these concepts going on here, right? And again, I'm not being critical, right? Like, just as somebody who introduced testing to the team, I really screwed up here that someone would even think that this is valuable and spend the time doing this, right? Because what they did is they tested the test framework, the mocking framework.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly, right.
You don't test an interface. And so that was kind of
That's
a real
learning curve. It's a learning curve kind of thing for people. I mean, I see that a lot where people don't understand what they're actually supposed to test.
Yeah.
And that's a tricky thing to figure out. But I want to go back to something you asked about, or something you mentioned is about it's funny how this has become such a conversation about testing, but I think that kind of gets at one of the main points of this whole thing. It's like the pain point. It's like, this is one of them. But you talked about the test results, I guess, as a delivery item, and that probably wasn't your words exactly, but that the test results are an output of the project or something. So when you say that, do you actually mean that there's a person who will, like, does that go to the business, or like, who is that an output to, or do you just mean it like sort of figuratively, like, well, we have a check that says, well, we have to have all our tests have to pass in our pipeline, or do you actually have someone that looks at the tests? And because you could get to a point, this is where I'm going with this, so sorry if the question's long here, but if you write your tests really nicely, you could get where the business rule is sort of in the test, and a business user could actually look down a list of tests and say, yes, when I click this button, I will get the total price of the product or something like that.
That's
right?
the holy grail. Yeah, that's the holy grail is tools like Cucumber and Gherkin. I think RSpec works on that, is a variant of that, or actually is an implementation of that. But those are tools where you more or less write, and by you, I mean the product, the business, whoever is giving you your requirements, you write your requirements in human English, readable English, and then you convert those into tests. I think that is the holy grail, the ideal. I've never actually seen it working. I've tried it. I've gotten to a certain point.
Right.
I think just below that, I've never successfully done it, even though I've tried several times. What I've been shooting for, I'm in the middle of this right now, is that I honestly believe the ideal situation is that when you have a separate QA team, now that's a big if, because I don't even believe in that. I think it should be all together, but put that aside, right? Most places have a separate QA team. When that is true, I really feel that the devs and the QA team should kind of be collaborating on the same set of tests, automated tests, right? And so what that looks like is that those tests then become literally a deliverable, right? As a developer, as a business person, you write the acceptance criteria. As a QA person, my work is to create a test plan and figure out how I'm going to verify this acceptance criteria, along with all the other variants and edge cases and all that stuff. Extrapolate from that. Like, that's your real job, right? Is not just taking things at face value and saying, well, those 4 things work, so the feature must be good, right? It's really putting it through its paces. That's what devs are generally not that great at. And then as a dev, obviously your job is to implement that thing, but you also should be writing those acceptance tests that prove that those acceptance criteria are met. And so you're handing over that. It's generally a 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, some small number of tests that prove that those acceptance criteria are working. And by handing over, I mean literally like committing into that shared repo that you and QA operate on. Now I started down this road at the last Tech Bash, right? And there were a number of, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there were a number of sessions at Tech Bash that kind of talked about this. And I'd love to catch up with those people, right? And I actually went and talked to them afterwards, and I was really kind of nailing it down because I was trying to take some ammo back to my place and kind of see how I can roll this out. But we should get those in the show notes. We should find those recordings and put them in here because they were exceptional talks. But that does assume and expect some level of technical ability and coding ability from the QA team, right? You need QA engineers, not QA testers. You need people who are not afraid of code. Now, you don't need coders, right? They don't need to be able to write an application from scratch, but people who are not afraid of code as opposed to people who just click and type, right?
Yeah, it's getting tricky, at this point.
That's a very high bar, right? It's a very, very
and
high
then
bar.
I've had other people say, well, why don't the developers not write the unit tests? Why don't the QA team just write the unit tests and things like that? And
well, so then my whole point of like you're handing over a relatively small set of tests. Like, let's say for 3 acceptance criteria, I hand over like 10 acceptance tests for it, right? That's going to grow into 40 or more. It's then the QA team's job to kind of go through and extrapolate those things out and really get into it and establish every edge case and everything like that, right? And so they're going to build that out, and that is their job. That's where they still have work, and that's their expertise. And then the net result of all of this is that those are actual acceptance tests in that library that stays along. These are now not throwaway tests, right? It's not just to prove that you delivered this feature. Now, when I said that earlier to, I think it was Chris, I kind of interjected like, oh, and if you just throw them away at the end, that's how you start. Like, don't be afraid of that. That's okay, right? If you write completely crap automation tests just to kind of fulfill this ideal that I'm talking about here, and you throw them away once that thing goes into production, don't be ashamed of that. That's a start, right? Start there.
Yeah.
So it's waste, right? It's incredibly inefficient, but it's a start. And then be mindful of that, right? And try and get more efficient, try and learn from that. How can you get better at that?
Yeah.
So some of the things we didn't talk a whole lot about that I think go in here are the scenario is new person joins the team and you've got to set up their machine, and somebody has an old Word doc that nobody's really run through in a year or longer. So you even tell the developer, hey, can you, as you're running through the Word doc, now is a great time to update it
for the next month.
You've heard it, right? You've heard, because I've heard it. Yeah. And so that automation doesn't really belong in a Word doc. I certainly know that there are plenty of issues with trying to automate some OSs over others. Like I think there's no doubt about it's probably much easier to automate Linux than it is to automate some of the older features in Windows. But the point is that you should at least strive to get as far as you can, get as much into as many scripts as you can. And even if there are gaps, it's something better than saying, well, yeah, I mean, gosh, how many times have I been told, well, the first couple of days, go get your machine set up. And it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, I'll install Visual Studio and some other tools that I like, but that still doesn't tell me how to be a developer on this team, right?
Yeah. Oh, and that's kind of baseline for automation. This is even back when we were working together. I was very focused on the F5 ability, I called it, right? It's Visual Studio .NET terminology, but like, what is the shortest path from checkout from source control to running project, even if it's just on your local machine, right? So that right there, that means automation. So the more automation you have, the fewer words you need to write in a doc, because it's automated.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And that can, honestly, for me, the evolution has actually been sit down and write it in a doc, get that full-fledged thing, and then look at that doc and say, how much of this can we automate?
Right.
Why the hell are we doing any of this manually? Like, that's often how I will automate things, right? This
Yeah.
is ridiculous that this is a 100-step manual process. We can automate this, half of this in a day, right? Because it's low-hanging fruit. So yeah, I mean, that's I focus on that a lot. And so if you focus on that on all of your projects, then you've now limited the barrier. Now, then you have things like, well, you have to install Visual Studio, Windows, .NET, you know.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, if it takes you a day or two to set up your dev machine when you're new to the team, okay.
Well, that's a different thing. You're talking about
reality.
installing tools versus becoming the developer, right? Becoming a developer. Let's say there's some lag time to get to that point, but now to become a developer, maybe a little bit of pairing because there's just no replacement for just having somebody sitting with you.
Yeah, you're learning the business. You're learning the code base.
Yeah. But it shouldn't be so hard. And I think, you know, as Mike Shea is saying in the chat there about, I love the idea of here's a VM. I have been playing a lot with what we're seeing come out with things like we've played with it on this show, like GitHub Code Spaces and the like, where maybe someday we can get to a place where, oh, look, the development environment is really self-contained in this Docker file, so I don't care where I work anymore.
I mean, that's how I opened, right? Like I was super excited about Docker, and it just hasn't quite gotten there. But yeah, I mean, that's why I was excited about Docker,
Right.
because you're like, hey, here's this script that you run it up and you have in your environment. But more importantly, you're exercising that script every day, multiple times a day, multiple times an hour, right? You're just destroying that Docker container and rebuilding it.
Do it a lot so you know it's right.
Yeah, you've reduced that manual step to run Docker Compose, right? That's it. Install Docker, check out the code, run Docker Compose. You know.
Yep.
Now, and it was funny at the bank we had used virtual machines that you had to remote into, and like on principle, it disgusts me. I absolutely hate it. But in practice, it solves a lot of these problems, right? When you have this just baseline image that has Visual Studio, now it's work to keep that image up, you know.
We have a lot of problems keeping image.
Don't discount that. Yeah.
People start work and they get that nice image, and up it comes with Visual Studio 2017 looking good. You know, it's like somebody's got to change the image. But
there's something to be said of doing work that is on an OS and installed in some file system that is not your main computer, not your main system, right? Even if it is some virtual system on your main system, it's something that you can blow away and rebuild. And the more you blow away and rebuild it, the better it will be, right? I heard this phrase a long time ago: the more something hurts, the more you should do it, right? Now, you know, take that as you will, but in development, if something is really causing you pain, you need to do it more. And in that case, that might actually lead you to automating it, right? If you're like, man, I have to go through this pain every single day, I'm going to automate the hell out of this. And so you're still doing it more. It's just not you manually doing it. You're automating it. Right. So now it's not painful anymore because you're doing it so much and you're exercising that automation. At Bank of America, I had created an automated script for our new dev setup because we had actual consultants that would kind of cycle through. So we had a new consultant probably at least once a month that were coming on board and off board. So we actually needed something. Even then, it was only getting executed once a month. It would get stale. It would break. You know, so even automation is certainly not the silver bullet if it's not run. You know, it needs to be actively run and maintained as well.
Everything does. I mean, like, you know, you started off by saying, like, these jobs, this is a hard job.
Yeah.
There's just so
Douglas
many...
Crockford says that writing correct programs is the hardest thing humans do, I believe is what he said. I might have that. I might be paraphrasing him, so sorry to Mr. Crockford if I've gotten that wrong. I'm sure he's watching tonight on either Twitch or YouTube. And if you are watching live on Twitch, hit the follow button. If you're watching live on YouTube, hit the like. If you don't like it, hit the unlike. I mean, whatever. At least we know you don't like this show. But go like the shows of the topics you do like. Hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when we go on. And if you're watching in the future on YouTube, only at youtube.com/The Dev Talk Show right now is the only place you can watch all these great recordings, including this one right here with Mr. Jess Chadwick. Hit that subscribe button and you'll know when we're going, you know, when we're going live, when there's videos, when we're coming up on new stuff. and then we'll know what shows you want to see, and then what you thought like, maybe we could do it. That doesn't matter. That's how we know. So leave us a comment too if you've worked on any of these things that you've done. I don't know if I can share my screen real quick, Rich, before we want. As one of my as a host of a great podcast would say, I think that's a show, right? I know a host who used to say that. I think that's a show.
Well, I think
Here
that's
it
a
is.
show.
This is the Static Void podcast from the 2018-2016 time frame.
Good time.
Sure, some of those things may be a little time dependent, but talked about the 12-factor app and talked about some things that maybe are kind of from the old days. This War Stories episode might have been one of look at that, 2015 might have been one of the favorites that people talked to me about
by far.
The on the street folks, like our friends in the community, said that was pretty cool. And those are timeless shows. I'm looking for something pretty funny. Here we go. We talked about Noel for like 90 minutes, right? Timeless shows, folks, from 2015. Static Void podcast. That was a load of fun, Jess, and it was a ton of fun having you here tonight. What we're doing a little bit better now is we have a schedule for the next few weeks. That's a little bit of an improvement. We're always improving here, just like you should as part of your development process. So go to meetup.com, the Dev Talk Show, search for us there. The URL is a little tough, the dashes between the Dev Talk Show, but that's okay. You search for it, you'll find it. We had Jess Chadwick on this week. We're going to talk about Snowflake next week. We have Sam coming on with .NET MAUI the week after that. So, hey, a schedule. That's awesome. Pretty cool stuff. And I think before we close it out, we are going to try our first Twitch raid after the outro, so that we can get the YouTube clipped on both ends so that it starts and ends the show. So Twitch veterans here, join us. Just stick through the outro. Join us for the raid. But what do you think, Andy, Jess? I had a lot of fun. Thank you both. This was great.
Loved it. Can't wait to come back.
It was
Talk
all
about
right.
learning.
The hallway conversation, the parking lot talk, that's why everyone involved here, including Jess, wanted to do these kinds of talks, because we would have them in a hallway, in a lobby, and we said, why aren't we sharing them with the world? Yeah. So thanks to everyone who joined us. We got a lot of great input from folks. We saw Mike Shea, we saw Meg. I'm pretty sure that I saw Hector in the chat.
Ancient Coder was here.
I really hope I didn't
I
miss
want to
anybody.
talk to Mike. I mean, I think that's a follow-up show. Is just get me and Mike on here and let's talk.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not sure we actually disagree as much as we think, as it seems.
Probably not. Yeah. No,
so hey, I think that'll do it. So if you are watching us in the future, you can let us know what prop bets we should be taking this weekend on the Super Bowl. Those used to be an old joke of the show, is tell me how something in the future is going out. But thank you for joining us. We have Rich here. Rich, maybe we'll say goodbye from beyond. Maybe. I'm listening. He's trying to get the mic going. Thank you for all the production work, Rich. I know he's ready to hit the outro button, and then stick around on Twitch.
Hector says thanks.
We're going to try and get a raid target in, as long as they don't finish up their stream before we can get out of here. So for Rich and Andy, thank you, Jess, for being here.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. And we will see you all next week, February 10th, same time, 8:30 U.S. Eastern, right here on the Dev Talk Show.